Hi, everyone. In this video, we are going to pursue our discussion of the histology of the skin layers or the structure of the skin layers. As we said in the previous video, the human skin has essentially two layers. The one at the top, which is the epidermis, and the one below, which is the dermis. Of course, the epidermis is a layer called epidermis, but it consists of several other layers that we will be discussing in this video. The dermis contains very important structures like the blood vessels, like the nerves, and we will be discussing them in detail later on. Of course, as we said before, it's not only the epidermis and the dermis, but there is a layer underneath that is called hypodermis, and hypo means under, but that layer is mostly, in most references, not considered an essential layer of the skin. So essentially, we can say that the skin consists of the epidermis and the dermis. The epidermis, as I said before, consists of several layers. So if we go back and see the slide where we had the structure, no, if you go forward, I'm sorry, to see the layers of the skin, we will find here that the epidermis itself, which is the uppermost layer of the skin, consists of several layers, like the basal cell layer or the germinating layer that we talked about before, the prickle cell layer that consists itself of several layers, and then the granular layer, and then this uppermost keratinized or desquamated layer that consists of dead cells. We, of course, will be discussing all this in full detail. I have enumerated the names or listed the names just to show you that the epidermis itself consists of at least 4 layers. And this is what the slide says. The slide says that some areas of the body are covered by thick skin. For example, if you look at the skin on the palm of your hand, you will find that it's much thicker than the skin on the dorsum of the hand. And by the dorsum of the hand, I mean the upper surface of the hand. So, we have the palms, which is the inner aspect of the hands. The skin is much thicker than the dorsum of the hand. So the thick skin actually has 5 epidermal layers, and we will be listing them later on, whereas the thin skin that lies on the rest of the body consists of only 4 epidermal layers. So there is a minority of body parts that are covered by thick skin with 5 epidermal layers, and these are essentially the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet, whereas the rest of the body is covered by thin skin that consists only of 4 epidermal layers. Now, what are the epidermal layers? We will first look at the test, have a look at the test, and then afterwards we will be showing this on the slide. The first epidermal layer and the lowermost epidermal layer is the stratum germinativum. The stratum germinativum is the lowermost layer in the epidermis, and you can say that the stratum germinativum or stratum basale, is the layer from which there will be germination or generation of the rest of the layers. So the stratum germinativum is the origin of all other layers. Germinativum means that it generates the other layers. So we usually have a very thin connective tissue layer that is called the basement membrane. And that basement membrane is a membrane on which the epithelium of the epidermis lies. So we have the stratum germinativum at the very bottom of the epidermal layers, but it is the most important layer because this bottom layer will divide to give daughter cells, and therefore it will give all the other top layers that represent the whole thickness of the epidermis. And in order for this germinative layer or stratum, stratum means layer, stratum means layer, in order for this germinative layer to carry out this function of generating other layers, it has to be characterized by rapid cell division. And what kind of cell division it is? This cell division should be mitosis because all the generated cells should have the same chromosomal number as the original layers. So these cells are essentially somatic cells. They are not gametes. And since they are somatic cells, they should have in their nuclei, each cell should have 46 chromosomes. The full number of chromosomes, the full diploid number or 2n number of chromosomes. So it is a somatic cell, and therefore, when somatic cells divide, they divide by mitosis. So these cells and any other cell that is responsible for generation of other cells should be characterized by the ability of carrying out rapid cell division or mitosis. We can say this in another way. We can say that these cells are highly proliferative. Proliferation means cell division, and highly proliferative means that they carry out or they have the ability to divide very rapidly. And this makes sense because since they are germinative or generative, then they have to generate other cells rapidly. They have a high power of regeneration, a high power of regeneration. And regeneration means renewal of cells because you know that if the bottom of the skin consists of this germinal layer or germinative layer, and we have other layers above, but the most superficial layer, because it is far away from the blood supply and from the oxygen supply and from nutrition. This is the first reason. And the second reason, because it is exposed to environmental conditions like drought and so on, then this layer consists of dead cells. So every now and then, the superficial layers of your body, which are dead cells, will be lost, will be shed away. And after being shed away, they have to be replaced because if they are not replaced, the thickness of your skin will diminish. And therefore, which layer is responsible for regenerating them or renewing them? It is the germinal layer by creating at the bottom new daughter cells that will push upward the older older cells and will regenerate or retrieve the thickness of the epidermis. But it's worth knowing that if this is the germinative layer, the germinative layer is the bottom layer, as we said before, and the germinative layer divides in order to give daughter cells. In order to give daughter cells. The first row of daughter cells will be younger than the germinative cells. But as the germinative cells continue to divide, say these are the germinative cells, so they will form daughter cells, and then these daughter cells will be pushed upward, by the new cells. So although the germinative cell is the origin of all cells, yet you will always have new cells, new daughter cells that are adjacent to the germinative layer, and the older cells will be pushed upward. The older cells will be pushed upward. So this is how we visualize the relative age of the layers of the epidermis. So the stratum germinativum is the bottom layer of the epidermis. And by the way, as I said before, this is the basement membrane. And the basement membrane is a connective tissue layer that attaches the bottom layer of the epidermis to the underlying dermis. The dermis is also made of connective tissue. So actually, the basement membrane has two functions. The first function is that it represents a base surface or a base layer on which the cells of the germinative layer sit or are attached. And the other function is that it allows the first layer of the epidermis, which is the germinative layer, to be attached to the underlying dermis. The first layer of the epidermis, as we said before, which is the germinative layer, contains three different types of cells. So what are these three cells? The majority of the layers are the keratinocytes, and there are the melanocytes that produce melanin pigment. So we have the keratinocytes, the melanocytes, and a third group of cells that we haven't mentioned in the last video, which is the tactile cells. And tactile is derived from the verb to touch. So tactile cells are sensory cells. They're actually, as we will be seeing on the next part of the video, they are sensory receptors. And these tactile cells are concerned with detecting the sensation of touch. So receptors always detect sensations. So the proper verb to use with when explaining the function of a sensory receptors is that it detects a sensation. Let's go back to the diagram and see where these cells exist on the diagram. So as we said before, this is the basal cell layer, and the other name for the basal cell layer is the germinative layer. And then we have a more difficult name for the basement membrane, which is the basal lamina. And lamina again means layer. And we have different types of cells. As you can see, most of the cells are rectangular, but some of the cells look triangular. Why do they look triangular? If you look here, you will see basal cell in transit. In transit means that this cell is uh, is ready to move upward to the next layer. And part of the reason why the cells are look triangular like this is that they are crowded. So a cell in transit means that the cell will move upward very soon in order to replenish the lost cells upwards from the uppermost layers. But the basal cell in transit is also squeezed because the cells are too many. Why are the cells too many? Because the rate of cell division is very high. So the cells are crowded. So there isn't enough place for every cell to stay at ease and to display its natural rectangular shape in the cross section. These cells are the keratinocytes. And as you can see, the keratinocytes represent the majority of the skin cells. And it is this type of cells that represents the majority that carries out germination and replenishing of the missing cell layers that occur due to loss of the superficial layers of the skin. So actually the germinative role or the generative role is the function of the keratinocytes. As we said before, the second type of cells are the melanocytes, and the melanocytes, the main function of the melanocytes is to produce pigment. So they are the main melanin producing cells in the skin. Melanin producing cells in the skin. And melanin, as we said before, is a pigment that gives shades of brown to both the hairs and the skin. So we all have skin pigmentation, except, of course, albino people. We all have skin pigmentation that varies from white to black. By the way, I've just read that the term negro is no more utilized as we used to use it, for example, when I was in the college, because like it includes like discrimination. So it's only black. So the darkest skin tone is considered black because the term negro is now prohibited or banned because it carries this sense of discrimination or labeling people because of their races or their ethnicity. So we have shades of skin that vary from skin color that vary from white to black. So melanin is responsible for, according to the amount of melanin that you have in your skin, you will have shades of brown in your skin and in your hair. The melanocytes are not only producing melanin for themselves, and that's why they appear brown on the microscopic slide, but they also transfer this melanin. So the other function is not only producing, but transferring melanin to the remainder of the cells, because it's not only enough to have one or two or even 10 or hundreds of melanocytes scattered in your skin to give the skin color. In order for your skin color to be homogeneous, the melanin pigment should be diffused to all the cells. So melanin will be transported from the melanocytes to the neighboring keratinocytes, and then these neighboring keratinocytes will be pushed upward by the newer cells, and therefore this guarantees that all the cells of the skin will have the pigmentation. And of course, we talked a lot about the importance of melanin. So according to what I've just said, we can say that the keratinocytes have the following characteristics. The keratinocytes, first of all, they are the major cells in the skin. Number two, they have this germinative power that is responsible for forming new layers of the skin. Number three, they contain melanin pigment, but they do not produce it. So they contain melanin that was produced inside the melanocyte, but they also contain keratin. And we've talked before about keratin, and it's important in making the skin tough and water impermeable. So these are the two cells that we've talked about before, but we have a third cell, which is Merkel's cell. And Merkel's cell actually is a sensory cell, as we said before, and this sensory cell is connected to a sensory nerve ending, to a sensory nerve that passes to the dermis. Because if we have a clear picture of the dermis, we will see that the dermis is full of nerve endings. So, like here, for example, you can see how we have several sensory nerve endings on the diagram, and all these sensory nerve endings will be discussed, of course, in detail, and all these sensory nerve endings have one important function, is to detect sensation. Now, what are the types of cells in the stratum basale? We've just mentioned that we have the keratinocytes, the melanocytes, and the tactile cells. And as we said before, the tactile cells represent touch receptors. We will read the content of the slide in order to wrap up what we have just said. The keratinocytes are the most abundant cells in this layer, which is the basal cell layer. As we said before, they go through cell division in order to replace the cells that are shed away from the superficial layers of the skin. They contain a tough structural because it gives strength to the cells, called keratin, which strengthens the skin and makes it waterproof. These are the two functions of keratin, and in addition to this, they also contain melanin pigment. So they are pigmented. This is very important. Keratinocytes are pigmented, but the pigment is not produced inside them, but comes to them from the melanocytes. The melanocytes are scattered among the keratinocytes, but of course they are much fewer than the keratinocytes. They produce melanin, and this is very important that the production of melanin is in reaction to the exposure to ultraviolet rays. So what is the stimulus or the trigger for melanin production? The stimulus or the trigger for melanin production is ultraviolet rays, or the exposure to ultraviolet rays. And as we said before, melanin will be transferred to the keratinocytes. This is very important. So the keratinocytes are pigmented. Again, I'm repeating, they are pigmented, of course, less pigmented than the melanocytes. But another difference is that they do not produce their own pigment. So if we want to summarize this, so inside this germinal layer, we have the melanocyte and the keratinocyte. Okay, the melanocytes are less numerous than the keratinocytes. The keratinocytes are not only more numerous, but they are the most numerous. The melanocytes are pigmented. The keratinocytes are also, pigmented, but of course they are less pigmented than the melanocytes. And the third difference is that the melanocytes produce and transfer the pigment, they produce and transfer the melanin, whereas the keratinocytes receive melanin, they do not produce it. And the fourth difference in this comparison will be related to keratin. The melanocytes have very little keratin, a small amount of keratin, whereas the keratinocytes are rich in keratin. They are rich in keratin. Here also we remind you of the role of melanin in protecting DNA from mutation and therefore from cancer. The tactile cells are nerve cells, of course, and they are modified nerve cells that are responsible for light touch. What is light touch? Light touch is in contradistinction with deep touch. Light touch is the superficial touch. Like, for example, when you touch your skin with a bit of paper, when a bit of paper touches your skin, when a light feather touches your skin, when a small insect walks on your skin, all this is a light touch sensation. The rest of the epidermal layers include the following layer, the layer that comes above the germinative layer. Of course, it is the stratum spinosum. The stratum spinosum, of course, you know what spine is. Why are the cells in this layer called stratum spinosum? Because under the microscope, we can see that those cells are connected to each other by filamentous structures called desmosomes. So they have a prickly appearance as if they were pinned to each other, or as if they are sewn to each other, or from the verb to sew. Okay, so as if there were stitches in between them. So we call this layer, which consists effectively of several layers, 4 or 5 layers. But as you can see, these junctions in between the cells, the filamentous structures in between the cells, look like staples or look like threads that join the cells together. So we call it the prickle cell layer, or so the informal name is prickle cell layer, and the formal name is the stratum spinosum. Inside those 5 layers thick, or more, a little bit more or a little bit less layers of the stratum spinosum, you see this whole thickness is the stratum spinosum. We can see the dendritic cell. So the dendritic cell is this green cell, and the dendritic cell is important for immune functions of the body. Immune functions. So we have Merkel's cell, this purple cell. If you can see the labeling, we have the melanocytes, and then we have the Merkel cells. I think the Merkel cells appear purple on the slides. So we have, let's check the labeling on the diagram. We have the blood vessels, of course, in the dermis. As I told you before, the layer of the dermis is nothing but connective tissue together with blood vessels, together with nerve fibers and lymphatics. And the blood vessels, of course, are arteries and veins. And whenever we have veins, we have lymphatics nearby. And then we have this basement membrane. And then we have the germinative layer, or the stratum basale, And then we have actually, the melanocyte is not clear on the diagram, but we have those Merkel's cells. I think they are the purple ones. It's not very clear, but we have the Langerhans cells, and the Langerhans cells is another name for those immune cells that are the dendritic cells. So because these immune cells have these processes that are called dendrites, so it is also called the dendritic cell. It is an immune cell, and actually it is a non-specific immune cell, or actually when it is non-specific, the more accurate terminology is not immunity, but non-specific defense cell, because we have two types of defensive mechanisms of the body. One that is non-specific, a group of cells that are non-specific, that can attack any kind of microbe, viruses, bacteria, fungi, foreign bodies, whatever. So this is not called immunity. This is the first line of defense in the body. And the first line of defense is usually less specialized. So we call them non-specific defense mechanism. This is the new terminology. And then we have a second line of defense that is more specialized, more specific, in which every immune cell will be responsible for a certain microbe or a certain antigen. This second line of defense is what we call immunity. So the group of cells that work in the first line of defense that is non-specific are called non-specific defense cells, and the second group of cells that are more specific, the second line that is specific, is the cells that work in this group are called immune cells. The third layer of the epidermis is above the prickle cell layer and is called the stratum granulosum, or the granular layer. And as you can see, it consists of several layers, from 3 to 5 layers usually. They are keratinocytes, just like any other cells in the skin are keratinocytes, but they are called granular cells because there are granules inside the cytosol. And what characterizes the epidermal cell layers is that the process of keratinization begins in this layer. And by keratinization, we don't mean that these cells start having keratin inside them, because we already know that all the skin cells contain keratin. But the process of keratinization means that there is accumulation of keratin inside the cells, and the accumulation of keratin inside the cells makes the keratinocytes be filled with keratin. So keratinization first means that we have excessive keratin inside the cell. As the cells move upward, as the cells become older and move upward, they accumulate keratin to the extent that this keratin, if this is the nucleus, for example, and these are the organelles, the keratin molecules accumulate inside the cell until they affect the function of the nucleus and the organelle. They inhibit the function, they inhibit proper functioning of the nucleus and proper functioning of the organelles until the cell dies. So it's good to have keratin in the cell, but it's bad to accumulate excessive amounts of keratins until we have this process of keratinization. So never define keratinization without saying that there is accumulation of excessive amounts of keratin in the granular cell layer until there is suffocation of the cell, until there is inability of the nucleus and the organelles to carry out this function, their function, and therefore death of the cell. So keratinization will continue in the uppermost layers, or the upcoming layers, but it starts in the granular layer. So if I ever ask you about the layer where keratinization starts, you will say that it starts in the stratum granulosum. The fourth layer is a layer that exists only in thick skin. So if we are not in the palms or in the soles, then we will skip the stratum lucidum and jump to the stratum corneum. But if we are in the palms or in the soles, we have said that there is an extra layer, which is the stratum lucidum. And of course, since it adds one layer to the skin, then it will make the skin thicker. So the stratum lucidum is present only in the thick skin layers, and lucidum means clear, actually, because the cells are clear under the microscope, and because they are so many and compressed, so they appear flat, they are closely packed. And what facilitates their close packing and their flat appearance is that they contain no more nucleus or organelles. Of course, because we said that the layer underneath is the stratum granulosum, as you can see here in the skin and in the picture. And the stratum granulosum is where death of the cell starts, because this is where keratinization occurs. So they are closely packed and flat in appearance. They are flat because they are closely packed. And they are closely packed because it's easy for them to be compressed. And why is it easy for them to be compressed? Because they contain no nucleus or organelles. And why don't they contain nucleus or organelles? Because keratinization has reached them. A keratin has accumulated until it has caused death of all the organelles and the nucleus. And they are filled with a protein called ileidine, and ileidine is a keratin precursor, as if the cells still need keratin to be produced. So they already contain a lot of keratin because in the granular cell layer they have accumulated keratin, but ileidine is striking. The presence of ileidine in large amounts is striking in the stratum lucidum, and this uh, this ileidine is a precursor of keratin. So the stratum lucidum layers are very rich in keratin. And this is important because in the thick skin of the palm and the soles, is exposed to mechanical, especially the soles. They carry our weight and they are all the time compressed against the floor as long as we are standing up. So because they are exposed to pressure and mechanical forces, so they have to be tough, and that's why they contain a lot of keratin. And then comes the last layer, that is the fourth layer if we are in thin skin, and it is the stratum corneum. This is the top layer, and of course, as we reach this top layer, keratinization has been completed and the cells are completely dead. And of course, since they are dead, they will be shed away. What's the cause of death of the stratum corneum? First of all, the process of keratinization that occurs in them. And second is that they are far from the blood supply. They are far from the blood vessels and the blood supply, so they don't receive enough oxygen and nutrients. How long how long do cells need to pass from the state of or from the stratum germinativum to the top layers of the skin and belong to the stratum corneum? It's about 2 weeks. So by the time the cells reach the stratum corneum, about 2 weeks have elapsed from their generation in the stratum germinativum. They become dead, they are shed away, and these cells are replaced from the underneath cells. Thank you, guys. We will stop here, and then we will be discussing this again on Tuesday in the class.